Two of my favourite topics, motorsport and drug smuggling.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm all over it.
Do you think he tried it and was like, I'm going to sell loads of this?
I think he probably did.
This is great. There's going to be a market for this.
Very similar sort of story of a successful guy chasing a dream not quite working out, sell some drugs.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Sotheby's Car Show. I'm Peter Haynes, and joining me again for this episode, my fellow colleagues and car specialists, we have Felix Archer, Anders Bilidt, and Will Smith. So, hello gents.
Hello.
Hello.
Have you been up to anything exciting since we last met? Seems like only moments ago.
Not really.
No. Fair enough. So today, Will, I think you're going to take the lead on this because we're going to delve into the murky world of motorsport and drug smuggling.
Yeah, it's not really a subject that is that well documented, but it definitely happened. And there's been a couple of awesome examples that we're going to go through of people that really pushed life and racing and finances to the absolute max and really explored the limits of how to live a fast life.
Maybe even a bit beyond the limits.
Exactly that. But
Two of my favourite topics, motorsport and drug smuggling.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm all over it.
Fantastic. So this story starts with a guy who we want to talk about called Randy Lanier. And that is a name that has sort of echoed through the halls of racing glory in the 80s, specifically the 1980s. He was a champion IMSA rising star of the scene. He then moved over to Indy and he became Rookie of the Year. I think it was 86. In 1986, Rookie of the Year at the Indy 500 in 1980. So we're not talking about like some fat middle-aged man who was plodding around at the back of the field, sort of selling drugs to the paddock. This was like a real hot shoe who was clearly extremely talented. Initially had got the eyes and ears of Porsche because he did very well in IMSA and had his own team. So let me give you a little introduction into Randy Lanier. So this was a very gifted driver of the 80s, and he competed in loads of motorsport events. IMSA, he won the 84 IMSA GTP title, which is really hard to do. We're thinking about when you're up against significant works teams of the times, like Porsche and Audi and all these.
He would have been there with a 962 then at the time, wouldn't they?
I think it would have been more 935s and 930.
You said in the 80s?
So 84, yeah.
84 IMSA, that would have been a 962, I'm pretty sure of that.
960, yeah, I'm pretty sure he did run a 962. Well, we definitely ran a
I'm not sure what he ran, I'm just saying 962s would have been in there, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, but I think he started in a 935 and built his name in a 935 and then moved on to Group C stuff. But there's a little bit more beneath the surface of the story because, you know, behind his racing career, he was also involved in a significant international drug smuggling syndicate. He imported tons of marijuana into the US through go faster boats and planes that he coordinated. And his criminal empire was quite as impressive as his racing career, effectively. So he started doing, I think, little bits of tobacco smuggling and here and there. He was born in Virginia, appropriately. He moved to Miami at like the age of 13 and discovered cannabis and begun recreational use of it, apparently, it says here. But
do you think he tried it and was like, I'm going to sell loads of this?
I think he probably did.
This is great. There's going to be a market for this.
really love
at 20 years old,
quantities.
you are right, Felix, because he did think it was a good idea, because by the age of 20, he bought a 27-foot Magnum Go Faster cigarette boat for $18,000 using money that he'd obviously acquired from dealing drugs. And then began smuggling marijuana from Bahamas to Florida as a sort of side hustle while operating a boat rental business, which was very, very much the front of the operation. So it's just really, really interesting. And actually, there's a great documentary about Randy Lanier on Netflix, and it was actually filmed by my brother, and who went around the world for about a year, sort of finding out about this guy and how it did it. But yeah, his steps into IMSA and racing obviously were coincided with his selling weed, basically, and he funded his racing career through his drug smuggling and through his drug operation.
Very clever. I mean, it's not cheap.
No,
so I guess you got to fund it somehow.
Do you think he sold drugs to go racing, or do you think he went racing to funnel money?
No, I think he sold drugs and he loved racing. I think he loved both.
He loved both in equal measure.
I think he loved both of them. So in 81, he made his IMSA debut at the Daytona finale in a 935 K3, and he finished 30th. Not particularly good. But the next year, he went to the 24 Hours of Daytona and had a notable but quite tragic run. And his partner, Bob Wallach, and Edgar Durant in a Ferrari 512 BBLM, no less. But it crashed after taking over the actual leading position. And they sadly crashed out of the race. But they showed great promise. And then throughout the sort of early 80s, he kind of slowly built up his career, and he went into obviously won some significant races. In 84, he founded his own race team called Blue Thunder Racing, which is a great name.
That's a very, very American racing name, isn't it?
Yeah. It's
got Tom Cruise written all over it.
Absolutely. And so it was actually, I think it was named after the offshore powerboats that were built by Meyer Lansky's Apache powerboats. So yeah, he created his own team. And in terms of racing success, he actually, won the IMSA Instant Championship with his own team. Like, not many people can say that. That they've not just, won, but they've owned the race team as well. It's incredibly achievement, really. Yeah. And then in terms of his successes, they then continued into Daytona 24 Hours, Indy 500 in 1986, as I said before, winning Rookie of the Year. And his empire at the same time with drug smuggling just sort of grew and grew at the same time. So his racing career was going up, his dope smuggling was also going like sky high, and everything was looking pretty good for Randy at this time. But unfortunately, there was obviously the fall from grace, like in any great story. It started actually with a crash, and he crashed at the Michigan 500, tire blowout at 214 miles an hour, broke his leg.
Marijuana all over the track.
100%. Big cleanup operation. And his drug smuggling activities were sort of exposed. And I suspect the IRS or equivalent of in America were looking at this guy being like, how does he fund and compete with works race teams and often beats them as a one-man band operation? It didn't really stack up. And
farmer out of Virginia.
There was obviously something behind his a significant monetary gain behind his activities. And it turned out that he'd smuggled 300 tons of marijuana valued at about $68 million at the time. And that was convicted for. That's what they could pin on him, 300 tons. So I'm assuming probably more if drug
and 60 something million US dollars in the 80s.
In the 80s, $68 million. So he was making some good money.
I would say you could run a team on that.
Yeah, and then there was another amazing twist in that he disappeared for a while, awaiting sentencing, and then was on the run for about a month or so, and went to, I think, Monte Carlo and Puerto Rico, Antigua, and he was then caught fishing in 1988, and subsequently him and his partner Ben Kramer were sentenced to life in prison under the new super drug laws that Reagan had brought in at the time. He went to prison and he
life in prison. That's heavy.
He was sentenced to life in prison, and he was scheduled for release in, I think, 2014. He had to do like 6 months halfway or something, and in 2015, 14-15, he was released, and he went out and competed at the Mid-Ohio driving a rally car, and was featured in Road and Track magazine as soon as so the first thing he did, he came out of prison, went to the rally circuit and did it.
The passion was real.
Absolutely. That's the story of Randy Lanier. And if there is a wonderful Netflix series. I think it's called Winning Ugly, and it's all about Randy and his exploits. And what's very evident is that this is a really, really talented guy who was completely anti-establishment and just thought, well, I want to go racing. This is how I'm going to fund it, and sort of just went out and did it anyway. And he's not, in his interviews in the documentary, he's not particularly show that much regret or sadness about the situation. He just seems to sort of have loved his life and had an amazing time in the 80s.
Was his motivation was bringing in drugs purely driven by a desire to go racing, or do you think even if he had no interest in racing and he had, I don't know, his hobby was mountain biking, do you think he'd still have been smuggling the drugs, or was he literally just trying to fund the motorsport? Was that the only motivation?
I think he says in the interview that this was his dream. This is what he wanted to do, and the way to get there without having to deal with the corporate bullshit of being within a big race team at the time, was to do it yourself, and the only way he could do it himself was to sell weed, and on significant scale. Good story.
Isn't it? Why wouldn't you just do one IMSA race every now and then? Just keep it low key. That you
make sure to win.
Race in the 90s. Had he just played it a bit more safe?
Yeah. Well, just don't win. Basically, come in second every time, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Maybe do some rallycross as well. But like once or twice a year, have your fun.
See that, but you're not, Felix. You're not accounting for the fact that motor racing is a drug in its own right, isn't it? And because at uber low level club racing, I've sort of been there myself, in the sense that when I was racing and had in my 20s and had no money, I was just racking up massive credit card debts. And I remember when I got married, half our wedding presents were bits for my racing car, because that's what that was what was on the wedding list. But but the thing is, you get, once you get sucked in, especially I think if you have a bit of a taste, some success, you can't let it go, and you'll almost do. I mean, fortunately, because none of us on this podcast are condoning drug use or the import or export of said product. When you think about what people like Niki Lauda did to get money, I mean, it was all legit, but the number of drivers that have literally put everything on the line, their houses, or they've just borrowed money without any real understanding of how they're ever going to pay that debt back, unless they have incredible success and then start earning money and they can service the debt. But I mean, motorsport is just littered with people that have been sucked in to this kind of motorsport drug and then crashed and burned horribly under mountains and mountains of debt.
Yeah.
That's
a normal story, right? That's
yeah.
The normal tale.
Yeah, it's this, yeah.
Because a lot more racing drivers don't really make it, and are left.
Well, it's like so much of sport, but I think motor racing is a particularly is almost the peak example of, without money, you simply can't compete at almost any level of motorsport. And the number of, we all know, since the beginning of motorsport, go back 100 years, who were the people taking part in motorsport? They were landed gentry, and they were earls and dukes. They were people that had a lot of money to fund it. And still, we've got the Lance Strolls, and we've got also any number of drivers that have come from Ayrton Senna, but drivers that have come from wealthy backgrounds and don't have a problem funding it. But the number of drivers that could have potentially been world champions who fell by the wayside,
talent isn't always enough, is it?
Yeah, I mean, you can win Wimbledon without having a bucket load of money to get you going in the sport, but motor racing's a different beast.
Just a quick one. The reference to that documentary is called Bad Sport. The Need for Weed is what it's called on Netflix, and it was filmed by my brother, who went spent a lot of time in America, but his most exciting and famous sort of story from the shoot was that he got to go to Gunner Racing, who are an amazing outfit in Florida, who prepare loads of IMSA cars, loads of 935s, loads of Group C cars, that sort of stuff.
They had the chopped GT1, didn't they? The Porsche GT1 that they bought.
Right.
It was, remember
that? Like in America, they're kind of like the top guys for running your Group C or highly modified Porsche racing car. And he got to go out in a 962 around the track and sit in the sort of fake seat that's not a seat in the 962 and film it as it was going around. So in the documentary, you get to see the cars that he was kind of using, and the kind of it just brings it all to life. It's all very easy for us to talk about it. It's not anywhere near as interesting as watching this guy, and all the period footage is fantastic. Like they've got all the period footage of IMSA and Indy and all that kind of stuff. And so check it out. Need for Weed.
But imagine the pressure as well. I mean, I was about to say poor guy. I guess not, because he chose it himself. But still, I mean, surely he would have known, wouldn't he, that he was, that he was going to get caught at some point. But he would have been aware of the risk for sure. And imagine the pressure of one running at the front of the field, having to perform, and then having a drug empire that you're trying to control sort of behind the scenes as well. I mean, I can't imagine just the scope of that. It's just, wow.
It's really cool.
I feel like if he clearly built an empire that big, I think maybe there's a feeling of it happens to them, not to me, that other people get caught.
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, that is the thing with. I speak with no experience of crime. I would like to just put that on the record. But isn't that the thing? Like with if you're involved in any kind of crime, you're not. You clearly can't think you're going to get caught. Otherwise, you just wouldn't do it, would you?
Yeah, and also you go so far down the rabbit hole that it's much harder to turn back than it is to continue on the path that you've gone down. But interestingly, Randy wasn't the only dude to do this in motorsport history.
He was late to the game, wasn't he?
There were guys doing it earlier. There was a very, very famous case in the UK, slightly less glamorous than sort of Miami powerboat drug smuggling in the case of Randy. But the UK equivalent was a guy who was dearly loved in the British touring car scene, and it was just he got up to the same sort of stuff, and this was Vic Lee, who is a name that people in British motorsport will know of because he had Vic Lee Motorsport. They prepared BMWs for the British Touring Car Championship. Yeah. Peter, you probably remember him, back in the day being like a big name in the sport.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It was early 90s, yeah?
Early 90s, late 80s. He was top of the shop. He was up there with, Richard Lloyd Racing and all of the kind of big UK motorsport outfits.
Soper Racing for him, I think.
Soper raced for him. Tim Harvey raced for him.
I mean, big names.
Big names, yeah, like huge names. So he, in 1993, it turned out that he was smuggling cocaine hidden in nitrogen gas cylinders. So what he would do was that he would often claim that he needed to go testing in Zandvoort, was his place of choice. So he'd pack up the whole team, go to Zandvoort, do some testing of his BMWs, fill up these cylinders, gas cylinders, which you do need for racing and tire inflation, stuff like that. Fill up these cylinders, and then with cocaine, and bring them back to the UK. And I don't know, but I suspect the authorities got a bit suspicious, because here's a guy competing in the British Touring Car Championship.
Only in England.
Only in England. Only happens in England. And yet he requires testing facilities.
Setting his cars up perfectly for a circuit that he's never going to race on.
Yeah. So they got a little bit suspicious.
Yeah, I have to go testing in Suzuka.
So it was a sad one. And then he got busted for 12. I think he did 12 years. And then he came back out of prison. And eventually, I think he kind of got back into the kind of racing world. I think he worked for Cobra Race Seats, or was in charge of that business for a while. But yeah, it was one of those sort of situations where I don't know in his case whether or not he was, funding the team through drug smuggling. I think he probably just thought he could make quite a lot of money by doing it. And yeah, he got busted, which was a bit of a shame. But crime doesn't pay, guys.
I mean, he got 12. Randy, for a bit of weed, got life.
Well, yes, and it was a bit harsh, but as I say, it coincided with Reagan. Just
a bit of weed.
Yeah,
it's a lot, but
a lot of weed.
It's worse than weed, no?
But the sentencing is
on the naughty scale.
Yeah, Lee was pretty. I think did well to get only 12 years. It would have been a lot longer somewhere.
Did he serve 12? Probably not.
I think he was sentenced to 12 and returned to racing after his release. And but again, there's been a few others as well.
Whittington brothers.
Yes, Bill and Don. They predate all of these guys, so they're probably the pioneers of race car drug smuggling, basically. And they were around in the 70s and 80s, and they were linked to drug running, and they had a plane for hire business, and were basically shuttling around marijuana. But they also won the 1979 24 Hour of Le Mans. So another example of like very talented racing.
I mean, if you go back even further, and this is not an area that I'm that familiar with, but I'm sure in the US motorsport world, wasn't there also some quite strong links between bootleggers back then and people getting into motorsport? I think there's some links there as well.
I'm sure, because motorsport is a logistical heavy operation, isn't it? Like you think about how much has to go through and travel around the world in order for Formula One to even exist. Yeah. There's a lot of opportunity there if you feel like doing business.
Bootleggers, it's not exactly the same as drugs, of course. That's running a drug cartel, but nonetheless, it's still illegal.
Yeah, and it's of course overshadows their. It makes you sort of think again about their achievements, which were legitimately there, and they obviously achieved huge success in winning Le Mans, or in Randy's case, Rookie of the Year, Indy 500, IMSA champion. Like these are not easy races to conquer or to come out on top at. So yeah, it's.
I'd like to think that Randy at some point was chasing for Rizzler sponsorship.
Oh God, Rizzler and Penthouse would have been.
Yeah, the Rizzler sponsorship would have completely kind of rounded off the whole operation.
Hiding in plain sight.
Although the other sort of motorsport related drug anecdote and I'm reluctant to kind of mention it because I absolutely know nothing about it. So I'm starting from a really low base point here. But there was that whole kind of John Delorean, Colin Chapman thing. And I've always known about it, but I've never really dug into it. Funny enough, the production company that made the documentary about RM Sotheby's a few years ago, that was a Northern Ireland production company, and I know that was on their radar as kind of a big documentary story that they wanted to do.
What is the story? What is the story? The claim?
Well, you see, this is where I'm wishing I'd never even mentioned it, because I mean, John Delorean of Delorean Sports Cars was a Northern Irishman. I think those cars the factory was in Northern Ireland, I guess. I think it must have been.
Yes, it was. It was in Northern Ireland.
But Colin Chapman was involved with John Delorean in that project, and there was John Delorean got busted for drug smuggling. And Colin, this is very close to when Colin Chapman died, but Chapman kind of was implicated, but he didn't really live long enough afterwards to for that story to really go anywhere. But
no, the documentary was made because I watched it and it was good.
Okay.
It basically detailed the fact that Delorean was this sort of Detroit superstar when he was younger. Like, he worked for, I think, either Ford or GM or one of these people, and he rose to the top of, like, these huge motoring manufacturers, and then got to a point where was like, I'm going to build my own car. That's my dream. I always wanted to do it. And he thought, okay, there was huge tax incentives to build a factory in Northern Ireland because that was in a real bad place at the time with the Troubles. And so they built a factory. Margaret Thatcher was involved because she kind of incentivized them to do it and bring jobs to the area. And I think it just snowballed. The problems started. Lotus were brought in to engineer some of the suspension and help with the development of the car. And then effectively they built a load of them, couldn't sell any of them. Or they sold a few, but they didn't sell enough of them. And money got tight. And then he was suspected that he was dealing drugs on the side to fund and keep the business going. And then weirdly, there was a sting operation with the FBI and him, whereby it's all filmed on camera, and they do a drug deal, and then they bust him. But where they messed up was that his lawyers then argued that it was effectively entrapment, that they brought him into this false situation, and they successfully pleaded that there was an entrapment case that against the FBI. So he didn't completely get away with it. But it was, a very similar sort of story of a successful guy chasing a dream not quite working out, sell some drugs.
Brilliant. So now I know how to get my old 57 Alpha on track. Just
back to winning ways.
Speed. Maybe not.
Yeah, this is not an endorsement to go and set up international drug smuggling.
No, this is absolutely not.
Quite clearly, they didn't really get away with it, did they? In the end.
No, but if we're going to do it, our group of advice is to try and get away with it. Try harder.
Try harder. Yeah.
So there you go, Randy Lanier. What an interesting guy, and the connection between drug smuggling and motorsport, which I guess some people probably didn't know existed.
I think the overarching moral of this story is don't attempt to go and compete in high-level motorsport, and don't decide that you're going to build your own sports car, because it seldom ends well.
You're going to end up selling weed instead.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's
the market is, after all, potentially going to get tougher. So maybe we all need to have a chat offline.
Oh dear.
Oh no. Oh dear.
Will, that was tremendous. That was a tour de force.
Well,
what they're talking about.
Our researchers, who, it's not like all of this is up here. Like, our researchers do an amazing job. Greg, Johnny, the producer, to feed us this information. But it is a subject that I sort of knew a little bit about. Because
apparently your brother. Pretty cool.
And through my bro, who was like, I'm doing a documentary about a weed smuggling motor racing driver. And I was like, what? I had no idea. And he spent a whole year going to America doing this show, basically. It was cool.
So to be clear, the Netflix show that you talked about, that is his show. He produced that from beginning to end.
He was the director of photography on that show. So yeah, he's a cameraman and that's his job. And he did that show. So yeah, check it out if you can. It's a cool story. And as I say, the footage is great and it's really well put together. So yeah, check it out.
Awesome.
Very cool.
That's really, really good. Gents, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
I hope you've had an enjoyable little recording session.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us, everyone that's listening in. Don't forget that you can download this podcast, subscribe, like in all the usual places. If you want to see our 4 highly attractive faces, you can watch this on YouTube. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend that to anybody because you're only going to be disappointed. But it's been a pleasure, and please join us next week for the next episode. Bye, everyone.